I want to talk about my dad. Well, technically my stepfather, but he adopted me when I was 3 years old. And he is probably the one consistency that I've had in my life that has been there, that has loved me, that has supported me unconditionally up until the day of his death. He was one of the angels in my life. And not only in my life, but he was an angel in many people's lives. He went on, never had any children of his own, but adopted myself and my three siblings. Also, my parents went on to adopt two more children. And he had, by the time that he passed on, he had so many grandchildren and people that cared about him. He had such a big, lovely family, and he always was in the mix with the young people. He always was there. And he was probably one of the most deeply spiritual people that I know. And so this is really to him. He was First Nations, and my daughter right now is doing research on his lineage. What she found out about my dad made a lot of sense. You see, my grandfather, his father, he didn't go on a reserve like many of the Indians did around this place at that time, but he was given a land graft. He was actually given a great portion of land, which was unheard of. I don't know of any others who did this. And as my daughter is finding out about my dad, that he comes from a line of chiefs. You know, I swear my dad used to tease me and tell me that he was Hebrew when I was growing up. His family was very special. Those were the best moments I had in my life, going and spending a weekend at Kokum's house with the fiddle going and bannock in the stove. It was a beautiful, lovely family. It was the one haven that I had in my life was my dad. And so when I came across this information, and I had been looking into this myself, so I've known some of this. I didn't look into my dad's direct lineage like my daughter is, which I'm so excited to get the final product. But I was looking into the American Indians or Canadian Indians for quite some time. For about the last 10 years, I knew that there was a lot more infrastructure and buildings because I stumbled across one book. And in this one book, it had a map and it showed all of these Indian sections like what we see today, where we see Alberta and BC, and that this map said like this was in Cree and Sioux, and gave them all tribes. They were by that. So I can't prove it because I don't know where that map is. I haven't been able to find it. But it was talking about all of the First Nations, how they actually had civilization, advanced civilization here. You know, there's certain groups that are never given an explanation of where they're from. And a lot of the tribes, the Indian tribes of America, are amongst that. They know themselves. They know where they come from. They tell the stories. I mean, we got to listen to them. They tell, like my dad, because he used to tease me all the time, that he was a Hebrew.
Plenty of evidence of this civilization right here in North America, but most of us don't hear about it because many American scholars cling to this false idea that nobody had the capability of sailing to America before Christopher Columbus, and they dismiss the thousands of artifacts that show ancient Hebrew, Egyptian, Assyrian, cuneiform, and Christianity in ancient North America, and they say that those thousands of artifacts are all somehow fake, because it goes against their stubborn claim that Columbus was the first one to come here from across the Atlantic Ocean. Well, enough of that rant, let's get to it. Here's a list of what I'm briefly going to talk about in this video. Talk about an ancient North American civilization that began in the 500s BC and are over by 400 AD. This civilization had many cities and forts surrounded by deep ditches with high walls of dirt. They also had many large mounds of dirt filled with human bones. They had metal armor and weapons, including head plates, breastplates, arm shields, swords, scimitars, axes. They had DNA called haplogroup X, which is traced back to the Mediterranean area, including Israel. And we're also going to talk about ancient Hebrew, Egyptian, Assyrian, and cuneiform writings in North America. We're going to talk about a 600 BC ship sailing the ocean from the Arabian Peninsula to the Gulf of Mexico. We're going to talk about a heavenly God visiting and teaching the ancient Native Americans. We're going to talk about the earthquake of 1811 and 1812, matching the destruction at the time of Jesus Christ's crucifixion. And we're going to talk about Native American words related to Jehovah, the River Sidon, the Narrow Neck, Nephi, and more. Now, I'm willing to guess that most people don't know about this evidence. I never knew about it until like late 2013 when I went looking for it. So let's get into it. First, the ancient civilization. So here's the United States, and within this circle, this is the main area where an ancient civilization lived who were called the Mound Builders. Now, there's two mound-building civilizations. One is called the Hopewell, and another one is called the Adena. And the Hopewell are who we're going to focus on in this video. They lived from the 500s BC up to 400 AD. Now, the Adena, they lived much earlier than the Hopewell. They lived from the 2000s BC right up until about the beginning of the Hopewell. And they lived more near the Great Lakes, but there are traces of the Hopewell and the Adena all throughout the circle and even out west in the western part of the United States area. But before we get talking about them, I just want to explain where the name came from. The name Hopewell has nothing to do with this civilization. The reason why they're called Hopewell is because the very first official archaeologic excavation that was done on the Hopewell Mound Builders was in 1891 on the property of this guy right here. This guy's name is Mordecai Hopewell. Now, there were many excavations done on the Mound Builders long before 1891, but the United States, as a brand new country, really didn't have an archaeologic organization until much later. And so that's why in 1891 it was the first official archaeologic dig. And because it was done on Mordecai Hopewell's property, from that point on, any of the mound building civilization that matched what they found on his property was forevermore called Hopewell. Now, the story with the Adena mound builders, the way that they got the name Adena is a very similar story, but like I say, we're not going to talk about them in this video. That'll be for another video. Now, the oldest Hopewell sites are found right down here around the panhandle of Florida. Those date back to the 500s BC. Now, there's also some other areas that date back to the 500s BC, as you can see right up here along the Atlantic coast, then also in Tennessee, and also up here in Iowa. These are all areas where there are Hopewell sites that date back to the 500s BC, again with the very oldest being right there around the panhandle of Florida. And throughout the centuries, they spread all around this eastern half of the United States and lower east Canada. And then the Hopewell civilization gets smaller and smaller until they end right here in New York around 400 AD. Now, here's some cool things to pay attention to. According to the Iroquois Native American history, they say that their ancient ancestors sailed in boats somewhere from the east and arrived somewhere around Florida. And according to the Algonquin Native American history, they say that their ancient ancestors also sailed somewhere from the east, came down through the St. Lawrence Seaway up in Canada, and arrived in the Great Lakes area. The Lord led a small group of people out of Jerusalem in 600 BC, brought them across the ocean, and they landed somewhere in the Americas in a land south, around 589, 88 BC, somewhere around there. And then a couple years later, back over in Jerusalem in 587 BC, when it was captured by the Babylonians, the Lord led a group of people out of Jerusalem and across the ocean into a land that was in the north.
Part 7. Native Americans with Hebrew and Other Middle Eastern Ancestry. Alright, this section probably should have been Part 1 because it's loaded with solid evidence. But I'm kind of glad that it's Part 7 because even though I knew enough in 2015 to make a video about it, I've learned so much more since then, which is why this section is so long. And it's still a condensed version. So stick with me to the end. So not only is this section going to go over some controversial ancient writings found on artifacts, rocks, and caves in North America, but it's also going to go over actual Hebrew and Middle Eastern languages and customs that are still preserved in some Native American tribes even to this day. So for people who insist that there's no evidence of Middle Eastern ancestry in any Native Americans, they just haven't done their research, because again, this video is loaded with examples, which are only the tip of the iceberg of what's available out there to learn. Now there are people out there, especially in US academia, who love to dismiss the tens of thousands of artifacts showing ancient Middle Eastern languages and customs here in North America as fakes. But then how do they explain some of the Middle Eastern languages and customs, particularly Hebrew, that are still preserved among some Native American cultures? Is it just coincidence? Of course not. And I'm going to show you a few examples. Now, I'm not saying that all Native Americans have Hebrew or other Middle Eastern ancestry, but there definitely are some. Now, if you're a Native American watching this video, it may or may not apply to you, depending on what tribes are in your ancestry. If it does apply to you, I'd love to hear what you have to say. So let's get into it. I'm going to start with the name of God. Here are two columns. One column shows the name of God in Hebrew and various pronunciations of it. The other column shows various pronunciations of the name of God or Creator, as he is more often called, in various Native American cultures. Look at his name. Coincidence? No. Next, I want to show you a list of Algonquin words and phrases from a book printed in 1825 called View of the Hebrews by Ethan Smith. Now, like many books in this time period of the United States, it calls the Native Americans savages, which I don't agree with. Just because the Native American tribes had different cultures than the European settlers doesn't mean they were savages. But anyway, be prepared to see that term in old books like this. So here's a list of words and phrases from View of the Hebrews shown in 3 columns. The first column is in English. The second column is from Algonquin tribes originally from the eastern United States before the government took their lands and forced them onto reservations. The third column is Hebrew or Chaldaic, which are both Semitic languages. Obviously, columns 2 and 3 are spelled out with English letters so that the reader can try to pronounce them as they actually sound. Look how similar these words and phrases are that have been preserved in the Algonquin languages. Some are exact, some are near exact, others are very similar. And look at the type of words and phrases. A lot of them are biblical. This is the real deal. Linguistics like this are not coincidences or fakes. View of the Hebrews is a very informative book, and I suggest you read it. It has many more examples of language, customs, and beliefs preserved among Native Americans that tie into Middle Eastern ancestry. Another excellent book is The 10 Tribes of Israel by Timothy R. Jenkins, printed in 1883. There are many other old books like these. I'm going to give an example of an account from the 10 Tribes of Israel. It's on page 16, and I'll just read it for you here. It says, "The following is from Alexander's Messenger, published many years ago in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania." And again, this book was published in 1883, so many years ago from 1883. Anyway, it goes on to say, "A government officer stationed at Lake Superior at an early day, before any white settlers had invaded that part of the country, after becoming acquainted with a number of Indian tribes, found one tribe in possession of a copper tube, tightly soldered. And when asked what it contained, they said they were not able to tell, but they had received it from their ancestors a long time ago. The officer finally prevailed upon them to let him open the article, and when he did so, He found it filled with parchment, with inscriptions that he could not read, but by sending the parchment to Washington City, where it was examined by competent Hebrew scholars, it was declared to be part of the 5 books of Moses. So that's the first 5 books of the Bible. Here we have another link in the chain proving that Hebrews were here many years before the white man came to this continent, and that the present North American Indians are their descendants. And again, like I said earlier in this video, I'm not saying that every single Native American tribe has Hebrew ancestry in it, but there definitely are some tribes with Hebrew ancestry in them. Anyway, this book, The 10 Tribes of Israel, and also View of the Hebrews, are filled with awesome stories like this. And like I said, there's many other old books like these out there. You just gotta go looking for them and read through them. Now I want to move on to the Micmac Native Americans from the Northeast US and Southeast Canada. Now, look how similar some of these characters are to characters in the written language of the Micmac tribe, whose written language is a form of Egyptian called Hieratic Egyptian. They had this language before the European settlers even arrived. How do the Micmacs have Hieratic Egyptian as their language? Is it fake? Is it just coincidence? No. It's been handed down from their ancient ancestors. That's how they had it before the European settlers arrived. Now I want to move on to Chief Joseph of the Nez Perce tribe, who were forced westward off their land by the U.S. Army. Chief Joseph's story can easily be found on the internet and in various books. In 1877, Chief Joseph, which is his English name, was captured by the army. When they searched his medicine bag, they took out a small tablet from him. He, the chief, said that the tablet had been passed down in his family for many generations, and that they had inherited it from their white ancestors, and that white men had come among his ancestors long ago. He, the chief, said that the tablet had been passed down in his family for many generations, and that they had inherited it from their white ancestors, and that white men had come among his ancestors long ago. The tablet was confirmed by Professor Robert Biggs to be an ancient writing called cuneiform.
I just wanted to stop here. Yes, I did play that part twice for you. That actually is not uncommon. You will find that that is what most of the chiefs, the passed on legends, will say, that the white men came and gave it. Unfortunately, this brother still is thinking that the Hebrews are only the Native Americans and not realizing what he just said and what he just read. I want to bring your attention to this video that I made. It is, we know what Jesus looked like on earth. And this is talking about some of the parts that it's talking about is Joseph and Marimathema. And in the account from the Jewish writings, it says that Joseph and Marimathema was Jesus's uncle, which was Mary, his mother's uncle. So great uncle. And it goes into that Jesus traveled with Joseph of Marimathema, and that Joseph of Marimathema was a tin merchant, had many ships, and he traveled all over to Scotland, Ireland. He went established churches in different places. There's many accounts of this. This is huge archaeology discoveries in all of these areas that prove who the Israelites were and where they went. That's what this one is going. It also goes into many firsthand accounts of people who physically saw Jesus and described. There is made reference to over 50 firsthand accounts of Jesus's appearance. So I'd like you to, I'm going to put a link to this video as well. And I'm not trying to self-promote. It's just that all of this information goes together.
Robert Biggs was a professor of Assyriology at the Oriental University of Chicago. The tablet was simply a sales receipt for a lamb bought around 2040 BC in the Assyrian-Babylonian area of the Middle East. I'll let you read the translation here because I'll butcher the names. And for anyone who assumes that Chief Joseph was lying about the tablet, take a look at his medicine bag. On his medicine bag is a symbol known as the Star of Asher, which is an ancient symbol for an Assyrian Babylonian god. As of 1971, in honor of that ancient symbol, the Assyrian flag has the Star of Asher on it today. The 4-point star has 3 streams of light going out from between each point. The main difference in Chief Joseph's star is that each stream of light starts out as one stream and then separates into 3 points at the end. This is not fake. This is not coincidence. This is real. Now I want to talk about the Cherokee tribe. Here is their account of the creation of the world, which you'll find is almost exactly the same as described in the book of Genesis in the Bible. This is in their words. You can just pause the video to read over it. The Cherokee also have a special ceremony in the fall called the Green Corn Ceremony. Take some time to pause the video and look at the similarities of the Green Corn Ceremony in comparison to the special fall ceremonies of Israel. The Muskogee or Creek tribe also have a special fall ceremony called the Green Corn Dance. Now take a look at the similarities between this ceremony and the fall ceremonies of Israel. These 2 examples of ceremonial similarities are only from 2 Native American tribes, but there are many more tribes that you can research who also have similar customs and beliefs to the Hebrews. As I've said so many times throughout this video, these are not coincidences. They've been passed down through many generations from their ancient ancestors. Next, I want to talk about the Cheyenne tribe, but I'm going to save that for last because I learned some things from one of their medicine men, and it's going to take up a big chunk of this section. I thought about making it a separate video, but it's just so interesting that I want to share it here. So right now, let's go over some artifacts. Each of these artifacts deserves their own video, which I'd like to do in the future, but this video is already long enough as it is, so I'll be brief about the artifacts. So I've shared some examples of Middle Eastern languages and customs that have been handed down through the generations in some Native American tribes. It's there. It's in their tribes. It can't be denied. It's not fake. It's not coincidence. It's fact. Yet, over the entire history of the United States, whenever artifacts are found that are tied to Middle Eastern cultures, U.S. academia always finds a way to make up a story about how they're fake, and anybody who was involved in finding them is just a fraud. Why? Well, that's a whole other video, and again, I'm trying to keep this as short and simple as I can, but it has to do a lot with ideas called manifest destiny, the doctrine of discovery, and a guy you may have heard of by the name of John Wesley Powell. Now, with the tens of thousands of artifacts found in the U.S. over the last few hundred years, of course there's going to be some fakes. But all of them? Not a chance. Especially when there are Native American tribes from the eastern U.S. and Canada who have Middle Eastern languages and customs preserved in their cultures to this day. For every story I've heard from U.S. academia to discredit certain artifacts and the people who found them, there's always been a strong counter-argument in defense of the artifacts. So first, on many artifacts from the eastern U.S. and Canada, you'll see this symbol. This is a word in the cuneiform language, which originated in the Middle East shortly after the time of the Tower of Babel. Yet, it is a sacred symbol in many Algonquin tribes right here in North America that has been passed on through the generations from their ancient ancestors. Why is it sacred to these tribes? Because it is the name of the Creator, which is read from right to left, and the name is Yod-Heh-Vah. Now, like I said, this symbol has been found all over the eastern half of North America and even out west. But I want to focus right now on what are known as the Michigan relics, many of which have this cuneiform name of God carved on them, as well as Egyptian, Assyrian, Phoenician, and Greek characters, and artwork depicting biblical stories. Yet, U.S. academia says that the Michigan relics are all fakes created by some guys named James Scotford, Daniel Soper, and James Savage, starting in 1890 and into the early 1900s. But there are some major problems with these claims. The biggest problem is that even though the Michigan relics were a popular topic from 1890 to the early 1900s, the artifacts were being found as early as the 1840s. Why is this a big problem? Because Daniel Soper wasn't born until 1843. James Savage wasn't born until 1844. And James Scotford wasn't even born until 1852. You see, after Michigan became a state in 1838, people started moving there. And as they began clearing trees and plowing their fields and also digging through the mounds, they would find these artifacts, sometimes even mangled in the roots of very old trees. Signed documents by more than 50 farmers across 27 counties in Michigan show that they found these artifacts on their lands. And by the 1850s and 60s, there were even museums that had some of the artifacts on display. Another big problem is that the Scotford, Soper, and Savage collection is estimated to about 3,000 pieces, yet all the Michigan relics total has a low estimate of 10,000 pieces and a high estimate of 30,000 pieces. And most of them were made from copper and black slate from the Keweenaw Peninsula, which is on the separate part of Michigan on the other side of Lake Michigan and above Wisconsin. And ancient copper mines are there, which are estimated to date back as early as the 2000s BC, and in operation clear up until the 500s AD. And the Adena and Hopewell mound builders were experts in copper and other metal work. And like I said, it wasn't until 1890 that the Michigan relics became well known due to the Scotford, Soper, and Savage collection. Now let's say, for the benefit of the doubt, that these guys were making fakes. Let's say, since they were living in Michigan, they knew about the artifacts that had been found since the 1840s, and they decided to make some fakes and try to get rich and famous. Their 3,000-piece collection is still 7,000 pieces short of the low estimate of Michigan relics. But because U.S. academia says the Scotford, Soper, Savage collection are fakes, they also dismiss the other 7,000 to 27,000 Michigan artifacts and the fact that they were being found as early as the 1840s, before Scotford was even born, and before or around the same time that Soper and Savage were born. Again, the cuneiform Yod-Heh-Vah symbol has been passed down through the generations among Algonquin Native Americans from their ancient ancestors, and it is the name of Creator, and they pronounce it Yod-Heh-Vah, even to this day. Another interesting find in Michigan is this carving of a Hebrew menorah in a cave that belongs to the Potawatomi tribe. And the Potawatomi say that this is a sacred symbol from their ancient ancestors. U.S. academia says it's a pitchfork. But as you probably know, U.S. academia doesn't care about learning from the Native Americans. Here are some Hebrew carvings found in Connecticut of the names of some biblical prophets. But U.S. academia says that some guy who just happened to know Hebrew was taking a lunch break from working in the mines and decided to just carve these names into the rock. Here's another artifact called the Bat Creek Stone, found on Cherokee land near Bat Creek in Tennessee in 1889 during an official U.S. archaeological excavation controlled by the Smithsonian itself. They said it was ancient Cherokee writing and would display it or print it as such. And nobody ever accused the stone of being fake until about 75 years later in the 1960s, when Cyrus Gordon, a professor of Mediterranean studies at Brandeis University, said that the stone had been shown upside down for all those years, and that when turned right side up, the characters engraved on the stone were ancient Hebrew letters that said, "For the Judeans." Some other translations vary slightly, but Judeans or Judah is always in there. Well, as soon as people started noticing that, then suddenly US academia started saying, "Oh, well then the stone is fake," even though they found it on their own controlled excavation, and the Smithsonian continued to display it and print it upside down. Well, in recent years, the Cherokee won a U.S. court case to get all of the artifacts and skeleton bones found on that dig back from the Smithsonian. The Smithsonian said they couldn't find the bones, but the Cherokee did get the Back Creek stone, but there was a condition attached with it. The Cherokee were told by the court that they had to continue to display the stone as it was in the Smithsonian, upside down. So you think about that. There is a great effort by U.S. academia to prevent people from knowing that there is Middle Eastern ancestry within some ancient Native American tribe. Learn about the artifacts, but regardless of the artifacts, learn about the Middle Eastern language and customs still preserved in some Native American tribes today. Now here's a survey drawing of a unique ancient Hopewell mound builder site in Ohio that I talked about in part 2. And I've also made a separate video about it called Hebrews Were in Ancient America, which I'll leave a link to in the description box below, and you can learn about it in more detail. Notice the Hebrew oil lamp, the 9-candle menorah, and also the compass and the square, all of which have sacred meaning in the Hebrew culture. A survey drawing of this site is included in the Smithsonian's first publication in 1848 called Ancient Monuments of the Mississippi Valley by Ephraim Squire and Edwin Davis. Yet there are still people who accuse this site of being fake as well. Later, in the early 1900s, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers completely leveled this entire site down to the ground. Yet they left all the other mound builder sites around it alone. So again, you think about that. The site has been said to have been at or near this spot here by Fayetteville, Ohio. And if you notice this field here on the left, there are ditches that form a sacred Hebrew letter called the Shin, which may have been where the mound builders got the dirt from to build the site, or it could just be a natural formation because there's a lot of similar curvy ditches in the area. But if so, maybe that's why they built it in that area, which isn't a far-fetched idea, because the city of Jerusalem in Israel is built on terrain that naturally forms a Shin as well. Here are some other important artifacts that were found in the 1860s in Ohio near a town called Newark, which are also accused of being fake. I've made a more detailed video on these artifacts as well, called The 10 Commandments in Ancient America. Anyway, they were excavated at a mound builder site by a man named David Wyrick and 7 or 8 other witnesses, and are nicknamed the Newark Holy Stones. The most popular one is called the Decalogue Stone, which was inside the stone case you see behind it, buried with a skeleton at the bottom and center of a very large mound. This stone has the entire 10 Commandments engraved on it in ancient block Hebrew writing. The man in the middle is holding tablets and wearing a turban, and the name above his head says Moshe, which means Moses. The other stone is nicknamed the Keystone, just because that's what it looks like. And it has ancient Hebrew writing on all 4 sides, which says the King of the Earth, the Word of the Lord, the Laws of Jehovah, and the Holy of Holies. The small stone bowl is also significant because in the Hebrew culture, a vessel was considered impure if it had been made out of clay or something and then cooked to harden. And so if they wanted a pure vessel to hold holy water or oil, they would carve the vessel out of stone. And speaking of the 10 Commandments, Ohio is not the only place where they're found in ancient America. Remember the account earlier in this video from the book The 10 Tribes of Israel about the Native Americans around Lake Superior in the 1800s who had part of the 5 books of Moses written on parchment in a little copper tube passed on from their ancient ancestors through many generations. And again, the mound builders were experts in copper. Well, the Ten Commandments are mentioned all throughout the 5 books of Moses, beginning in the second book, Exodus, when the Lord gave the 10 Commandments to Moses. Also, the Cheyenne tribe know about the 10 Commandments from their ancient ancestors. And we're about to finally talk about the Cheyenne tribe, but one last thing. The 10 Commandments are also found carved in a boulder in the mountains of Los Lunas, New Mexico. This is another artifact that U.S. academia accuses of being fake. But if you speak with Native Americans in that area who know a lot about it, they'll tell you it was there long before any white explorers came to the area. The stone is still there today, but sadly, somebody vandalized it around 2006 and scratched over the top line. But the rest of it is still legible, and with permission, you can go see it. But that's not all. At the top of the mountain is an ancient fort similar to Fort Masada in Israel. There's also an astronomy carving up there which shows the position of the stars from one night during the year of, I can't remember if it was 107 BC or 107 AD. Other things to research in the Southwest are the Tucson-led Arizona artifacts, which are really cool, but I need to learn more about them, and so I'm not going to go into them right now in this video. Alright, let's get into the Cheyenne tribe. I have a friend named Sean Littlebear who lives in Oklahoma and is one of the Cheyenne's medicine men, one of their 4 arrow men, and he's also their record keeper, but I'm not sure if they have more than one of those. The Cheyenne tribe also have Hebrew-related customs. Back in about the year 2000, the Prime Minister of Israel gave the Cheyenne tribe land to own in Israel, because Israel had learned that the Cheyenne were distant relatives of theirs. How did they know this? There's a Jewish ceremony that Israel knew had a missing portion of the ceremony, which their ancestors knew, but they no longer knew it. So they were searching among cultures that they believed had Hebrew ancestry to see if any of those cultures' ceremonies had this missing portion. Well, they found this missing portion in the Cheyenne tribe, because the Cheyenne performed this same particular Jewish ceremony, only they performed the complete version of it. So Israel had finally found this missing portion of the ceremony, and in return, the Prime Minister gave land in Israel to the Cheyenne tribe. Sean is one of the 4 arrow men in the Cheyenne tribe and has been invited by Israel to be in the ceremony when they perform it. That is not coincidence or fake. Now this land that the Cheyenne owns in Israel has a hill on it. It is one of 3 hills that are sacred to the Cheyenne people. Sean has told me about the other 2 hills. One of them is Bear Butte Mountain in South Dakota. The Cheyenne call it the Holy Sacred Walking Mountain. The reason for these names and why the mountain is sacred to them is because they say that a very long time ago, an army of their enemies were coming to attack their ancestors. And there was a great prophet among their ancestors who told them that if they had faith in the Creator, that the Creator would save them from the army. Then the prophet commanded the mountain to rise up, move over the army, and land on top of them. They say it looked like a giant walking bear. The Cheyenne still gather at Bear Butte Mountain to this day. The other hill that is sacred to the Cheyenne people is the Hill Cumorah in Palmyra, New York, who also match up with the Adena and Hopewell mound builder cultures. And archaeology and Native Americans tell us that the Hopewell mound builder culture ended in New York around 400 AD. The reason this hill is sacred to the Cheyenne people is because they say that a record of their ancient ancestors was buried in it and would one day come out of the hill and bless the whole world. They compare it to seeds being planted in the hill and fruit growing from those seeds that would bless the whole world. There's an excellent book called He Walked the Americas by Taylor Hanson, a non-Mormon author who spent much of her life with Native Americans and learned that most of them had an account in their culture of a great white god or prophet who spent time with their people and performed miracles and taught them many things. So I suggest reading that book as well. These 3 sacred hills to the Cheyenne are not fake. This is the real deal. I also mentioned that Sean is the record keeper for the Cheyenne people. The Cheyenne and many other tribes whom they associate with have many ancient records that they keep safely hidden and guarded in caves because they don't want the U.S. government to take them and destroy them as they've done with so many other Native American artifacts and cities. Mainstream U.S. academia would have us believe that Native Americans don't have any written history or language, which is absolutely false. Sean says the Cheyenne and many other tribes they associate with have records of their people recorded on booklets, bark, leather, bones, and the most ancient records are preserved on stone tablets and metal plates and are written in Egyptian hieroglyphs, Phoenician, and Hebrew. There are so many other Hebrew and early Christian beliefs preserved in the Cheyenne culture, such as the story of Adam and Eve, the 10 Commandments, as I mentioned earlier. And the Cheyenne leadership was organized the exact way that Jesus Christ had organized his church while he was on the earth, Jerusalem, as mentioned in the Bible. And that organization is a chief apostle with 2 apostles under him and 12 apostles under them. The Cheyenne used to have a chief with 2 under him and 12 under them in leadership. This type of leadership ended when the U.S. government were trying to get the head Cheyenne chief to sign away their lands to the United States and give the chief an English name. The chief's real name was Ben Whiteshield, which is a Hebrew name, and he told them that he had Hebrew ancestry and didn't want an English name and didn't want to sign over the Cheyenne lands to the United States. Well, sadly, as we know, the United States ended up taking the Cheyenne's land anyway. And along that topic, I need to mention the U.S. Indian Removal Act of 1830, otherwise known as the Trail of Tears, where the United States wrongly justified taking away the lands of the Native American tribes and forcing them to move onto reservations on the other side of Arkansas, Missouri, and Iowa, which was then the western border of the United States. This is why so many Native American tribes are still in Oklahoma, Kansas, and Nebraska to this day. And remember, it was the United States who forced the Native Americans off their homelands in the east, along the Trail of Tears to that western border. Now, does that mean that every single tribe in the area of Oklahoma, Kansas, and Nebraska have Hebrew ancestors? I don't know. But as I've talked about earlier in this video, the Potawatomi do have Hebrew ancestry, and so do the Seneca, the Wyandot, the Shawnee, the Delaware, the Sac, and the Fox. I've also talked in this video about the Cherokee, Muskogee, and Cheyenne, and they all do as well. And all of these tribes, as well as many others, were forced to that western border by the United States. Now, I don't know about the Micmac. They may have been skipped since they were mainly in Canada, and I think the Nez Perce were already west of that border, and so I don't think they were affected until the U.S. started moving further west and forcing them off their lands. Sean Little Bear and the Cheyenne tribe associate with all of the tribes in that area, and he tells me that most of them have Hebrew ancestry. So there's my long video. I hope it was worth the wait, and I hope you enjoyed it. It took me a while to go through my notes and compile and condense this information. There's so much more good stuff to share that's not mentioned in this video. So much more good stuff to learn. If you talk with the Native Americans and listen to them, they can take you back even further than that. It's important to listen to what the Native Americans have to say because they can tell us so much more than U.S. academia can. And U.S. academia doesn't always tell the truth. And those among them who do are often ridiculed, discredited, and victims of character assassination. So like I always say, do your own research, and you'll find out that a lot of Native American tribes have Hebrew and Middle Eastern ancestry.
There are many scriptures that indicate that the Israelites would not stay in the promised land, that they would be scattered, like Leviticus 26 and 33. And I will scatter you among the heathens, and will draw out a sword after you, and your land shall be desolate, and your cities wasted. Luke 21:24 says that the Israelites will be scattered and will no longer be in Jerusalem. And it says, "And they shall fall by the edge of the sword, and shall be led away captive into all nations. And Jerusalem shall be trodden down by the Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles be fulfilled." But Isaiah 54:7 also tells us, "For a small amount of time I have forsaken thee, but with great mercy I will gather thee." So the Israelites were scattered among the nations and settled in various places. And one of the places that they settled were here in America. And there's great indication that the American Indians, many of the groups, are part of the missing tribe of Israel. Blessings, everybody. Stay in love and light. And one more thing, I'd like to take you back to this video on Rh negative and Caucasian race DNA throughout history. It's one of my videos. And the reason why I'm doing that is there's been a lot of criticism about this research that's in this. Obviously, the people have not actually watched it. They just like the title. And just even yesterday, I was listening to a favorite station, and they were talking about how they feel sorry for people that think that the white people were part of Israel or were Israel. And this is research papers on here. So if you want to go back to this video, these are all research papers of DNA research, different scientists who've done research, and other articles that were written by scientists, and just the whole, whole bunch of stuff. I'm going to be adding to it. I know I added one more today. So there's one more piece of research that you can go. And I'm going to leave my email, because if you actually have proof, if you've got research that you've done, and heavy research that to prove that, I'd like to see it, because if I am mistaken, please, I do want to correct it. So please send me your information if you possibly can through email if this is incorrect. But other than that, I am going to continue to stand behind the research that I have done in this. Now, I am not saying whatsoever that it is only the Caucasian race, but I am saying that there is very strong indication throughout the world of the DNA evidence of the Rh negative and the Caucasian of being Israelites. And that cannot be disputed unless you want to just get to the point and say that you dispute DNA. And there was a number of different DNA studies. It wasn't just one. Many scientists did the DNA on all of this. Nobody just left it up to one. So this is, you have to just completely say science is completely fraudulent to ignore all of the information that is in this video. So don't take any wooden nickels, and don't believe anybody unless you've done the research yourself and you've looked into it yourself, just like I have here. And after doing this research, I'm pretty convinced that my stepdad, my daddy, was a Hebrew. God bless you all. Stay in love and light.